Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Journey to Supply Chain 2030. I'm your moderator, Allison Crawford. The future will be here faster than you think, and the speed at which supply chain is evolving means that to be ready for the 2030 initiatives, improvements and investments must be made now. Learn today which technologies will impact your business, what business models to embrace, and what staffing decisions to make to be ready for 2030. Before I hand this over to Laura and the rest of the panel for this discussion, there are a few things I want to cover with you. First, we're recording today's session and we'll post it on our on-demand webinar page. You can visit our website to listen to this or any of our other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out the slides to all attendees within 24 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. We encourage you to share these slides with others in your organization, and if you have questions, reach out to Laura or myself to set up a private discussion. We also want to hear your questions about our findings. During the webinar, please post the Q&A or chat function to the left of your screen. We've left time at the end of the presentation to address all of your questions. Finally, we will be live tweeting this webinar, so if you'd like to join in the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCIWebinar and the handle @SCIInsightsLLC during the event. Now, let me introduce your speakers. Marty Kislek is the Director of Global Operations for FMC Agricultural Solutions. During the more than 13 years in this role, he has had dual roles for about half that time, leading Global Innovation, Global Business Development, or Asia Area Director. Marty has also been based in Asia, where he established a subsidiary for manufacturing, sourcing, and process development in low-cost environments. Prior to this, he was a Global Business Director. Marty has been with the FMC in the crop protection chemicals industry for 38 years. He has held a variety of technical, management, and leadership roles, including materials planning, product and marketing management, operations management, and project manager. We're also joined by Stephen Melnick, PhD, a professor of operations and supply chain management at Michigan State University. He is an active researcher with 17 co-authored books on operations and supply chain management and over 90 referred research articles. His research interests include supply chain and design, metric system measurement, responsiveness supply chains, supply chain design, sustainability, strategic supply chain management. Dr. Melnick is an active researcher whose articles have appeared in over 90 international and national journals. Dr. Melnick sits on the editorial review board of numerous academic journals and is a sought-after speaker both nationally and internationally. Currently, Dr. Melnick is a member of the APICS Board of Directors for the 2016 year. And finally, let me introduce Laura Cesari, founder of Supply Chain Insights. Laura has spent 9 years as an industry analyst with Gartner Group and AMR Research and Altimeter Group, 10 years as a leader in the building of supply chain software at Manugistics and Descartes Systems Group, and 15 years as a supply chain practitioner at Procter & Gamble, Kraft General Foods, Clorox, and Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, which is now a division of Nestle. She founded Supply Chain Insights in 2012 to bring a new perspective to supply chain research and client advisory. As an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on the changing face of enterprise technology, and her research is designed for the early adopter seeking first mover advantage. So Laura, there's no time like the present to talk about the future, so let me hand this over to you to get started.
I think that's a great lead-in, and I can't think of two better panelists to have today than Steve and Marty. Marty has been a frequent advisor of mine as I've written books and articles to give me kind of a leg up to think differently. And Steve and I have had many great discussions in South Africa and around the world on speaking about the future of supply chain. So consistent with our mission on these webinars, what I'm going to be doing is using our research as a backdrop and engaging Steve and Marty to give their perspectives and dialogue. And then what I want to do is to bring in questions from the audience into the chat panel so that Steve and Marty can give their perspective on this as well. So, as we think about 2030, Source, Make, and Deliver were first written about together in 1982. We've always had a long history of logistics, but supply chain with a focus on source, make, and deliver cross-functionally is about 35 years old. So it's relatively new, and supply chain planning is relatively new. And we were talking earlier that many times we've focused on efficiency and optimality, and what we find is that most supply chains are stuck. We only find 12% of publicly held companies are driving improvement in performance at the intersection of cost and inventory. And the supply chain leader is really held accountable for the intersection of cost, inventory, and customer service. And some of the issues that we see in the research is that supply chains respond. They don't sense. They're not outside in. And that data is very batch. It's very much in the functions, and it can't move at the speed of business. And that we have a lot of new forms of analytics that are evolving, but the business leaders are struggling for how to really embrace that. And as we do our work for our Imagine conference, we ask people to think about 2030 and what drives the highest level of value. You can see that 2025 advanced analytics, things like Apache Spark and Hadoop and blockchain are really going to drive some of the initial advancements, but then it's a coalescence of technologies like Internet of Things, which requires streaming data architectures, and 3D printing, and robotics and autonomous vehicles, and social application platforms for collaborative economy. These things are coalescing for new business models. But one of the issues that we find is that the technology appetite of the supply chain leader is diminishing. In fact, today we have 3 times more conservative late adopters than we have early adopters. And so it's a dichotomy in the industry that we've got an exciting wealth of technology evolving, but yet we're becoming more conservative and we aren't able to drive the business benefits that many people thought we should get. So Marty, what's your perspective on this, and what's your insight about how do we unstick the supply chain? Do you agree with the research, and what's your thought?
Thank you, Laura. I absolutely do agree with the research. It struck me. Unsticking to me is back to experimentation. We've got to find a way to explore, experiment, and try new things.
But how do we do that, Marty? Because most of the innovation is really centered on products, and most of the IT budget is really very tight about maintenance revenue for licensed software. How do we drive test and experimentation and process innovation in that world?
Well, supply chains are about doing. They can't afford to miss. It's not like you miss a sale and you move on to the next sale. When you get a sale, you better deliver it, and you better be able to deliver it. So you have to take a team and break them away, insulate them, much like research, and get them to be curious, experiment, try new things on a pilot level or in an isolated area. Free them of the burdens that we live with as we run supply chains.
Steve, how about your perspective? Do you agree with the research, and what's your recommendation that you feel based upon what you see?
A couple of observations. Yes, I agree with the research, and in fact, one of the things that you're really hitting on is now getting traction is the concept Industry 4.0. And in Industry 4.0, what people are talking about is this rapid acceleration of change. And I also agree with one of your analyses that we can no longer react. And the reason we can no longer react is because in a rapidly changing environment, the reality of supply chains is we have to build in advance because it takes time to change supply chains. That is, today's supply chain is a result of things we've done in the past. Tomorrow's supply chain is going to be a result of things we're doing today. And the third comment that you made in the research slide about we're becoming more conservative is not surprising. I mean, in the early 1990s, a guy by the name of Jeffrey Moore rediscovered some research, and he came up with the Crossing the Chasm, which said that most managers are really early majority or late majority. They're risk averse. And the final concept about being, how do we unstick? The reality is you can only unstick things if you can show people that what we're currently doing doesn't work. But as long as things work, people are very hesitant to abandon what they know for what they don't know. Some good points.
But, Steve, when I share the research for the Supply Chains to Admire and the Metrics That Matter research, and I show that, most companies are at the same level in 2015 they were at 2006, and that we aren't making progress, most people stare at the charts in disbelief. It's not what you see in APICS or CSCMP or most academics. Why do you think there's a gap?
I think it's a gap because, first of all, you've always got a problem. Let's talk about the nature of research. The nature of research is when we do research, we look at a broad sample. Typically, we focus on the mean. And when you focus on the mean, you're ignoring the outliers. And that means you're not looking at the really innovative, strong performers or the people who are doing poorly. So when you look at the people in the middle, they tend not to move much. And so, number one, that's one reason. And the other reason, I think, is we have measures which don't make people aware of the other dimensions of performance. A lot of the measures we use for supply chain are fundamentally cost-based. And there, we're doing what we should do. And finally, this is something I think it's a mindset. 2015, Deloitte does a study on where are we going? What type of skills do we need in supply chain? The answer, critical thinking. Why? Because they're seeing the emergence of a new type of supply chain manager, the supply chain leader, who is very strategic. And I think, to be honest, many of the people who are currently in supply chain are doers. They're good at that. Very few of them are strategic leaders. And, it's like what Edgar Schein said about culture. He said managers work within culture, leaders work on culture. In other words, managers work within the supply chain, leaders work on the supply chain.
Well, but I wonder, Marty, if we've accepted the hype of technology providers that said, if you invest in my technology, great things are going to happen, or consultants who say, if you do this, great things will happen. But we really haven't pushed up that effective frontier. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we don't believe the hype. I think we've conditioned an industry that doesn't believe the hype anymore. But believing the hype is different. It's much like Steve talks about. I think operations people are doers. There's few people with great critical thinking in operations. We don't put people in operations there to do that. I think designing system solutions, looking at the supply chain, you bring up the subject of networks. How many people really understand the network dynamics and understand that what they deliver is what the network delivers, not what a plant delivers, not what a person delivers? So I do think I don't think we're buying the hype, but I also don't think we're taking the ideas, the insights, the people who work on some of this technology and say, okay, let me run with it in an experimental way. And I do think we can do some things to see what we can't see about how our supply chains deliver.
Marty, you were one of the first supply chain leaders I ever saw to almost completely outsource your supply chain. And you understand the network effect. But as I talk to people about investing in the network, most of the time they're investing in the four walls and have been pretty insular to the network effects. Tell me what drove you to do it early.
Well, it was strategy that told us early. It said, what is the value we're delivering? What are we delivering to our customers? We backed out. We said, steel, the act of having the plants ourselves and controlling, having employees working in factories, had nothing to do with what our customers wanted from us. And when we looked around the world, and I'm an advocate of looking around the world, looking at other companies and saying there are a lot of people doing interesting things, the fringes, as Steve would talk, I say, go look at those fringes. You'd be surprised how many answers are there. So we went out and said, well, we've got a lot of things going on that are in other networks and around the world that we can take advantage of and deliver value to our customers, not decide that we need some physical structure or need some software, as you say. I need this software, I need that. What about the software do you need? What about what is the insight that it's bringing to you besides a physical mechanism? So we just divorced ourselves from physical mechanisms and looked at what's somebody buying from us.
Well, and what we find in our supply chain research is the companies that have built networks or done more outsourcing are typically better planners, and they're also better at network management. And when we asked supply chain leaders, and this was in a number of studies, and so this base is over 200, what descriptors would they use for today's supply chain? You can see that most would say they're traditional, they're tactical, they're cautious. Then, 1 in 3 would say there's room for improvement, whereas 1/3 would say that they're working well. So what we did was we took our research and we said, well, what are the characteristics of these supply chains that are working well? And what can we learn from this that can help us with 2030? And we found 5 characteristics correlated at a 90% confidence level. One was the executive team understanding the supply chain. The efficient supply chain is not the most effective, that they needed to invest in test and learn, they needed to invest in process innovation, more advanced supply chain visibility. So if a company had better capabilities for transportation and first-tier suppliers and also order management in the distributor relationships and channels, they would rate themselves higher. So visibility outside the 4 walls. And also companies that believed that they were better adept at organizational change management. And we actually tested cross-functional alignment. So where we had closed the gaps between the sales and the operational teams, and between the operational teams and finance and the operations teams in manufacturing and procurement, we were able to see that they believed that the supply chains worked better, and the ability to access and use data. So these are the characteristics that made people believe that the supply chain was working well today. How do you think this changes in the future, Steve?
First of all, I'll compliment you on your research, because what you're finding out is something we found out at State, which is there's a difference. And couple of observations. Number one, you're talking about the fact that we're managing now at the edge in supply chain, which is we're no longer managing the internal supply chain. We're looking at managing relationships with finance, marketing, engineering, top management. The other thing you're hitting on is visibility. Most people right now in supply chain management are thinking of visibility in terms of risk. It's changed. Visibility now is a consumer-driven demand. And so right now the issues that you're raising there are important. And what you're really raising in that chart is that how do we create the manager, the leader, who is able to function in this new environment? And that's a challenge which I'm seeing many institutions, professional societies, and universities struggle with, because we're really good at delivering the functional expert. And the person that you're describing here is not, the person who you're describing here is not the solver, it's the person who asks the right question. It's the person like a Kettering, who was the innovation driver behind Alfred P. Sloan of GM, who used to say, a problem well stated is a problem half solved.
Marty, your thoughts?
Yeah, I say it's the curious. I'm very much with Steve. It is the curious, and I think that the leader who can see all this and work on this is important. It's interesting about the research. The cross-functional alignment has, I would say most supply chain leaders go home every night with some level of frustration about cross-functional alignment. If they don't, they're probably not working with their organization well. I'm almost inclined to say, I think as supply chain people, we need to get over that a little bit. I think we need to design solutions around that subject. I think we have way too much reliance as we enter this phase that Steve talks about, and I agree. We enter this phase where we're on the edge. We see those edges first as barriers, and we can't see them as barriers. We need to see them as reality, and we have two choices. We can be persuaders and sell how it can be different, or we can show people. We can experiment. We can work our way around cross-functional issues. And I think we've got to work ourselves around cross-functional issues. We've got to stop whining about them and design system solutions that incorporate the real life of an organization.
Yeah, I think that's so true. So many times operations folks aren't good at marketing or working around those edges, and often I see that they're victims. And one of the issues is that we've been good, Steve, like you said, at building functional leaders, but not necessarily what IBM calls the T-shaped manager, the person that has their feet in a function and their arms that can embrace cross-functional, from the customer's customer, the supplier's supplier. And we've had a lot of work from organizations like CSCMP and APICS, which those programs have really perpetuated functional leadership. How do we break that cycle and allow people to manage at the edges? Steve, thoughts?
That's a really good question, because that's the question we've been struggling with here at State, because all our programs, the reason being, you're moving from content to process. You're moving from tools to basically working with people, convincing people that, what is it we offer. You're educating people about the capabilities, what supply chain can and cannot do. You're trying to ensure that there's an agreement over desired outcomes. You're trying to ensure that we understand measures. And those are skills which I think very few supply chain people really feel comfortable with. And so you've asked a good question, and one of my concerns is I don't know how that's going to be done, because the reality is, and I hate to be the person that doesn't sound excited by what you're saying, because I think it's phenomenal, but the reality is the demand is for supply chain leadership, and we've developed a structure that doesn't do that. So right. The answer to your question is, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to be interested in the solution, because I see that demand being spoken very clearly from people in industry, because we interact with them all the time at Michigan State.
Yep. Marty, your thoughts on how you drive the next generation of thinking so that we can build those T-shaped managers?
Yes. At your conference this year, Laura, I keep hearing, I watch really progressive companies doing education within their own organization. And I'm always amazed by that, how well they take, people coming out of school, or they take engineers, they take people in their organizations who have a fundamental skill base, and they bring them into a different thinking, the way they want to shape the curiosity, the system dynamics. And I'd like to be doing that. I'd like to think that supply chains are going to have to do some of that themselves, while some of the schools are building. First of all, I'm not sure they're getting the best talent into these programs, and I kind of look, and the people I see coming out are less than skilled at these kind of things, and we just have to build that internally. Internal training. We went through the 1980s and part of the 90s with corporations and large businesses. They just ripped out their training programs, their internal right. training programs, and we're having to rebuild them, and we're suffering for that. And so I do see that. The other thing is about transformative. A second point is about great transformative change in the way we think. That's a very risky subject for a supply chain. Supply chains will not be transformative. We need to do that transforming in a laboratory setting. And I mean that euphemistically, in a laboratory setting. We need to do that in a way that that people see the results and the outcome and the potential. And that has to come from data, and frankly, it has to come from analytics, sophisticated analytics.
And, that's our next discussion. Mike asked the question, Marty, about how do you recommend getting funding for this innovation team? I talked to some people who say they're going to hold back part of their continuous improvement funds, right, and self-fund it. Any thoughts on how you get funding to do these scrappy laboratory kind of experiments?
You just happen to ask somebody in an industry that's not at our peak. We're at a trough in our cycles.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough market right now.
Yeah. Most supply chain leaders, myself included, have a huge amount of money we deal with, cost of goods, billions many times in big companies. So the idea to do that is to take from something else and put to that. I don't think you get a lot of arguments about doing that, but I think it's hard for us to think that way. So I recommend to supply chain leaders to say, go find something that you can cut, zero-based budget it, and take that money and put it somewhere. And when you get challenged, you say, look, I have this discretion to do this. We're going to get this out of here. And give yourself time, isolate your team, put a goal on them, as you've always told me, put them somewhere and let them go. So I think we need to steal from other places in tough times. And in good times, nobody sees it anyway. So you ought to be doing things in good times, not when they're tough.
Steve, did you have a thought there?
A couple of thoughts. First of all, Marty, I want to commend you because when you were talking, you really helped me remember something about there's a change taking place in the field, and it's the emergence of talent, not management, but talent leadership, where companies are going out and recognizing that they have to create an environment which is attractive. And the second issue is I listened to your discussion about cutting things. The one concern I have is when we look at excellent supply chain companies, sometimes top management has to be willing to put the money up into it. And by doing that, they're sending a very strong message to the rest of the organization that this is important. And I'm going to disagree with you. I learned this from Bosch many years ago when I was on a trip. The time to make the investments is not during the good time. It's when things are really bad. Because what you're doing is you're preparing yourself for when the demand picks up. Because once the demand picks up, what's going to happen is you're often caught up in the urgency of meeting demand, which is one of the first things you talked about at the very beginning of this presentation about how we're good doers. We don't have the luxury of saying no to things. And so my position is I think what you're raising, and I think they're brilliant issues. Number one, firms have got to think of it, and they've got to broaden their systems to be more of a leadership. How do we identify, attract, train, educate, expose, evaluate, promote, and communicate, and keep the best in-house? Because millennials, who are the people replacing a lot of the supply chain managers, are very purposeful. They're very concerned that if you don't give them the right skill sets, they'll go somewhere else. And the other point, I think if you're in the trough, do it. I saw too many organizations which cut in the trough, and when demand picks up, they're dead because they don't have the time. They didn't have the time. They don't have the time nor the resources to deal with fixing all the problems that they could have when things were bad. But your comments were right on.
Well, unfortunately, global growth has slowed, and many businesses are cyclical. And the growth from the global economy has not achieved the goals that many companies have hoped for. And M&A has been, fraught with issues. So, as we think about growth and we think about supply chain strategy, it's a tough conundrum, and it's something that I think you got to fight hard for to drive. So, Marty, any other thoughts before we move on here?
No, I think I think when you're down in a trough, what I've observed, Laura and I, you've talked about this. When you're down in a trough, I think supply chains deteriorate, and the entropy eats them up. and I've observed that, and I've heard that at your conference as well. And that's an interesting subject that not for this conversation, but something we ought to talk about. And it's a good thing to think about. When we're down, we conserve to live another day. Others go out of business. Those that when we're flying high, we get sloppy, Steve. We do. We get sloppy and distracted. And that's a behavior I think we need to change. And the other behavior we need to change is when we're down and our supply chains deteriorate, because they really do. It's an ugly dynamic, but we're never prepared for it. We're always following that curve.
Well, as we think about 2030, I think we have to think about new business models. You know, we didn't have Amazon in the 1980s, and we didn't have Uber or Lyft or Airbnb, a decade ago. And, we're starting to see autonomous vehicles. We're starting to see Internet of Things and a real shift in what's happening. And one of the barriers, I think, for moving to 2030 and building talent is rethinking analytics. Traditional analytics have been all around what I call the alphabet soup of SRM, CRM, ERP, APS, PLM, and we're really good in supply chain about those acronyms, and every one of these applications carried with it a limited business intelligence set that improved reporting. And what we're seeing is the evolution of analytics in between the alphabet soup of operational apps and workforce productivity. And we're starting to see the change in two dimensions. One is in the depth of analysis, but the other is in deployment. So if we think about clouds and the ability of clouds to go across supply chains and to connect disparate data sources. The average company has 7 ERP systems, 5 planning systems. We've gone through a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We have a lot of complexity on the IT backside, but also streams. So there are streams of data that run through the organization. Demand is a river that runs through the organization, and the Internet of Things is streaming data, whether it's sensors or programmable controllers or GPS or telematics. But there's also the need to have data in lakes to mine and to combine structured and unstructured data to be able to answer the questions we don't know to ask. Things like, does Kellogg's cereal smell at liners, right? They could have picked that up much earlier by listening to the social sentiment. Or, is there a problem with the airbags in a car? So social sentiment mining and warranty mining and quality mining and connecting structured and unstructured data in lakes to be able to answer the questions that we don't know to ask. But then if we also think about the ability to sense and to drive new insights, most of the analytics that we have today are either descriptive, things that are visual or visualization or reporting. And our historic lineage has been on predictive analytics, things that had a clear objective function, and we applied statistics to drive optimality. But we're starting to see the evolution of prescriptive analytics, which allows us to have predictions about what we should do, and alternatives, and cognitive analytics, which allows us to learn. And as we think about the evolution of prescriptive and cognitive analytics, what we're going to see is the evolution of rules-based ontologies that can go across the organization and across the network, replace master data management with each of these little circles being a different level of intelligence. Some will be descriptive, some will be predictive, some will be cognitive, and some will be prescriptive. But these are really different data analytics forms than what we've had in the last 2 decades. And this is really focused on sensing and adapting and learning. I envision that supply chain 15 years from now, instead of a planner coming in and looking at exceptions, we'll have computers that will basically tell the planner what to do. And it'll be like Siri on our iPhones, where we talk to the computer, and the computer says that it adjusted these changes but recommends looking at these others. And then we'll have the Internet of Things, which will drive signals from the field. This is Costa Coffee. This was a case study at my conference where a small coffee company actually automated the baristas to drive automatic replenishment. Now, Coca-Cola could have done the same thing at McDonald's, but didn't. And think about all the opportunities for sensing, whether it's OnStar in an automobile and the driverless cars that are coming, or the vendor-managed inventory systems with the automation of tanks, or the RFID sensors on trains and cars. We have hundreds and thousands of sensors that we don't use, all the programmable controllers on our factory floors. But yet it takes leadership to really build these analytics into streaming data to be able to look at sensing. And at our conference every year, we ask about analytics, and we ask people to say, you know, as they look at analytics for the next 15 years, what are going to be the important analytics topics? And sentiment analysis, which is the mining of unstructured text, was seen as the most important by 5%, cognitive reasoning by 28%, visualization, concurrent optimization by about 45%, and Internet of Things by about 22%. But I think it's the confluence and the rethinking of analytics. But the question is really talent and rethinking how we drive these processes. Now, Marty, I know you've been doing some work on this. What are your thoughts on how do we redefine analytics and sensing in the supply chain?
Well, to me, analytics, we've always had more data than we've been able to use, and we still do, and we've had for decades. It seems like we're behind. The leaders, the thinkers are behind the existence of data. Machines are there and sense and pick up things, the Internet. Our ability to do something with it brings me back to, is the mind that runs the supply chain, or even the leaders that work on the supply chain, are these the people who are best to do this? And I keep going back to, and I think not. And I go back to the experimentation. This is number one in experimentation for me, is analytics. How do you take a group of people, not encumber them with running a supply chain every day, and let them look at the dynamics and explore the dynamics, not only of how it operates, all the internal information that tells you how your current network works, but all the things you can see outside. So this is to me, it's about experimentation, it's about creative thinkers, and it's also about people have that skill and disconnecting them from our existing supply chains. They'll get caught up in information people think they want, and you've got to take them away from that to create new thoughts on analytics. The other thing about analytics is, even we're going to find things we don't know what to do with. And supply chain organizations, leaders like myself and others, look to say, what am I going to do with that? We're going to have to accept the fact that I won't be able to do something with it at first glance. We're going to have to figure out what to do with some of it, because we're going to see things we don't know what to do with. How do we react? Can we build the agility in our supply chain fast enough to do something with the analytics that's staring us in the face? We have many more questions in this than we have answers. But we've been behind the 8 ball for a lot of years, and I think we're going to stay behind the 8 ball. But the only way to get ahead is to put a group aside and experiment with it.
Do you think it's worth it, Marty?
Oh, absolutely. I'm clearly one of those people who marked on your survey that analytics is the biggest advantage we can take on. Yes, I'm an advocate of that. I think there's things out there, especially channels. For new companies, you talk about like Costa and some people who are unique business models in consumer areas. But you look at bricks and mortar chemical companies like ourselves and things, you will see much more difficult in that business-to-business channel. But this is a way to rethink how you interact with your channel. And we can't leave this to sales and marketing people. That's not what they're thinking about. We've got to do that ourselves.
Exactly. Right. Steve, your thoughts here?
A couple of observations. I thought Marty's comments were very interesting. Number one observation, what we're seeing right now when it comes to analytics is not new. We've always found, going back to the 1800s, that technology changes faster than management practice. And there's always a lag until people figure out what's going on. And so what's here is not new. Second, what you're really getting into is the rate of change is increasing. We've got more information. And what we have to start thinking about is a shift. And this is going to be an interesting one from what I call deliberate decision-making to fast decision-making. When I look at what's happening to us right now at this stage, I'm a history buff, so let me give you a background. I think about what happened in 1952. The United States was engaged in the Korean War, and we had replaced in that time period the piston-driven airplane by the jet airplane. We had the best jet airplane in the world, the F-86. We had the best trained pilots, but yet our death rates were very bimodal. You either died very quickly or else you survived and luck caught up with you. And they brought in a guy by the name of Colonel John R. Boyd, who was the epitome of an out-of-the-box thinker. And he looked at this situation, and what he came up with was those people who got shut down quickly waited until things were really certain. And his observation is, when an airplane's coming at you at 300 miles per hour, that's a joint closure of 600, you have time. When it's coming at you and you're closing at rates of 1,400, you don't. By the time you've made that decision, you're dead. And that then brings up a final comment, which I think is interesting, and that is firms have got to be willing, if we're going to deal with this new environment, to reward, to not punish failure as a general concept, and to differentiate between smart failures and dumb failures. And most organizations don't differentiate. What's a dumb failure? I tell you not to do something, you do it, and it goes wrong, just like I told you. That's dumb. What's a smart failure? You tried something, and you found out that something occurred which we never expected. Murphy lives. Most organizations, if they punish smart failure, they discourage people from taking chances. And I think what Marty was what I heard Marty saying in his comments about labs is we need an environment which allows people to take chances, because when you're dealing with change, not everything is going to go the way you think it's going to go. And organizations, if they punish smart failures, discourage all failures. I'll leave you with a kind of final thought. Just remember, when NASA was doing its stuff on the moon, they had an internal organization, a club called the Turtle Club. And the Turtle Club, or I think it was the Tortoise Club, their motto was, a tortoise only makes progress when it sticks out its neck.
I think that's great insight. Let's move on to talent. When we look at current talent issues, we're seeing that our real issue is changing skill requirements. We've got a lot of traditional things that have happened that we're making progress on, like not enough people or lack of executive support. But we've got the changing of the guard where we're able to get talent out of the schools for entry-level jobs, but middle management talent is an issue. To be able to get people into these senior managers and director-level jobs. And at the intersection of analytics and decision support, people that are in planning and analytics roles, we have a shortage. And it's taking us a lot of months to fill these jobs. Marty, any thoughts on talent and what that looks like for 2030?
Absolutely. I don't think the building talent in an organization is fairly straightforward. It's very difficult, but it's not complicated. You need a certain number of people that come up through the organization, a critical mass coming up through the organization versus being fed in to sustain the lifeblood, the vitality of an organization. It's that simple. Everybody doesn't have to come from the inside. There are certain there are certain groups of jobs, not just supply chain, but everywhere, that buying has a very low probability of success because of the culture of the organization, because of your adaptability. So I think this idea of building certain roles is very similar to any leadership role in any company, anywhere. And these roles that you point out are the ones that are tough, that have to be built inside, because the dynamics of what's going on within the organization, you have to understand what this person's talent are, watch them be successful in your model, and I mean social model, I mean business model, and I don't think you want to buy these roles. And I also think you want your organization see you developing these roles. And I think our concentration on hiring talent, people with critical thinking, people with learning agility, people who can perform in general skills, more general skills, into talent, lower level talent pools, and drawing those people out, building that talent inside, training them inside, is what's necessary. Really talent development. And it's a straightforward, hard work process. And I agree these are tough ones to build. And I want those built inside my organization, not outside.
Good job. Steve, your thoughts here?
Interesting comments. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective. I like the statement that you made there because there is a major shift taking place. And what's really taking place is you're replacing baby boomers like myself with millenniums. And the thing that's interesting, number one, there's not as many millenniums as there are baby boomers who are retiring, so there's a fundamental gap in terms of just numbers. Number two, the expectations are different. The millennium is a very different creature than the baby boomer. They have different expectations of the job. So when we talk to organizations coming in at Michigan State to recruit, they talk a lot about their concerns, and that's why earlier on I talked about this notion of talent leadership, which is the millennium is much more likely to move around, and it takes time and it takes work to develop the middle level manager. And if you have a person who moves around, you're not going to get that. So you have to create an environment where these people are encouraged to stay. And that's the challenge facing most organizations. There was a recent Department of Labor statistic about millennials that pointed out how many jobs they're willing to take by the time they're 35. And the statistic underlined the fact that these people are willing to move, and they want to move. If they're not getting the skills, the promotion, the benefits, they will go elsewhere. And so it's a little bit more complex than what Marty said, but it is a challenge. And I see organizations now struggling with it, but now, and we're seeing it from some very good organizations where they're developing strategies which are designed to identify the high potential and to keep them in the company, to make it interesting, to keep them learning new skills so that they see that the benefits of staying with the organization and learning the skills necessary to be the middle managers and above are higher than the costs and benefits of going to another organization. And so my cut is, it is hard work, it is straightforward, but companies I've seen are increasingly rethinking their strategies, and they're going from talent management to talent leadership. And that's a significant change in thinking.
I think that's great. And Marty, you were kind enough to come to our conference where what we're trying to do is help people imagine the future, which is really targeted around building this kind of talent. Any insights about this conference this year? It's going to be in Georgia.
Well, yeah, I have no difference with Steve's comment. In fact, if you look at boomers and you look at people like me, I'm a boomer, and if you watch their careers, even though they might have stayed in the company for a long time, you watch how many moves they make. And it's astonishing how many moves they make. So it's good in the out. So So while we think that people that are young people coming up are different in the sense of willing to make a move, those who have risen to the top of every organization that there ever is, those leaders move all over the place. So the idea of when we bring people in, we have to keep them, no doubt. The way to keep them is to move fast through skill building and talent building exercise, learning agility challenges. Move them in your organization quickly. The idea you bring somebody in and you keep them in a job for 3 years and then another job for 4 years, another job for 5 years is nonsense for talented people. It was nonsense for baby boomers and myself. I doubt that a baby boomer is going to move, that a millennial is going to move more times than I move within FMC than they move outside FMC. I doubt it. And that's not what the research says. So I think we're going to have to, this idea of not having enough talent, of specific talent, I agree. We're going to have to build it and work it. And we're going to have to work it internally. And whether the word, and I agree, it's talent leadership. And that talent leadership is going to have to be moving them internally, giving them experiences, but seeking not functional experts. We're going to have to seek and build people with much broader skills to deal with the networks, the connections and information. They're going to have to see much broader things, much bigger dynamics, and that's a different type of person we're looking for than looking for a nuts and bolts supply chain person.
I agree. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. And we've got 3 different programs where we're trying to build next generation thinking. We've got our conference, which will happen next year, September 5th through the 8th, 2017 in Georgia. And it's an event to really spark next generation thinking. We also have a face-to-face training class that will be happening in Philadelphia, January 18th to the 19th, where we'll be talking about the research and sharing in a small group of about 15 people. So if you're interested in networking and connecting with people one-on-one. And then we've got our online learning that we've partnered with CorpU on 7 catalysts, which are 1-week classes for 30 minutes a day for people to work on a collaborative e-learning platform to basically take assessments, see the research, and also the case studies. We're just trying to spark a next generation supply chain community. So Marty, any last comments before you have to go?
Well, I always find this tremendously stimulating. I walk away from this with many more ideas. So, I urge people to take those ideas and do something with them. I'm going to put a couple ideas down here and really say, all right, now what am I going to go do with it? So I'm walking away with some action.
Steve, your thoughts? Any last comments?
Basically, I think what we're getting into is we're getting into an environment where I like the themes that you've had, because what we're pointing out is the environment's going to become more complex. But guess what? We're going to have to embrace complexity. We're going to have to get managers, leaders who can feel comfortable with complexity. And the final thing I'm going to tell everyone who's on this webinar, this is now the best time to be a supply chain person. The reality is the demand's increasing. The supply is not in pace with demand, and this is a time when companies are looking for critical thinkers to be supply chain leaders, because the future of the firm in the past may have been marketing, it may have been engineering, but increasingly companies are coming to realize that the supply chain is critical to success. And so this is a great time, but the supply chain manager, the leader that is going to have to be created, has to deal with the very issues that you brought up in your research.
Well, and we're continuing to build research and share it openly because we really want to drive a dialogue. We think research shouldn't be behind the firewall. So we're hoping people can connect with us on Supply Chain Insights. We do a monthly newsletter. I also write weekly on the Supply Chain Shaman that is read by about 15,000 people around the world. We put all of our content into our community because people that are in the Middle East and Africa and Asia have difficulty getting to LinkedIn and SlideShare. And then we also post on LinkedIn, and we have our LinkedIn page. So join a new revolution. Be that supply chain leader. Make a difference. Strive to really make the inflection for Supply Chain 2030. Allison, I'll put it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And I want to thank our panelists for attending today or joining us today, and for all of you that were able to listen in. Just a few quick things to wrap up the presentation. As I mentioned, we're going to be sending out the links to the recording today, as well as links to the slides. If you need them, I know several of you have asked me about this, getting them earlier. If you do need them earlier, please email me at Allison, ALISON.Crawford, CRAWFORD, at supplychaininsights.com. Otherwise, take a look at your email tomorrow. We will be sending them out by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And again, all of these webinars are recorded either on our website at supplychaininsights.com. You can look under the tab for webinars, and they're all hosted there. I will also send you guys the link to our SlideShare page, where you can get access to all of our webinars, the downloadable slide decks, as well as other research. If you have any other questions, please do reach out to us. We are here to help you guys, and we love taking your questions. And again, Laura left up all of the ways to connect with us on social media, and so we are having an active presence on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We do encourage you to reach out to us on LinkedIn and continue the conversation. So thanks again, everyone, for the presentation, and we look forward to helping you improve the performance of your supply chain operations. Have a great afternoon.